first panel of today, Content and Behavior Moderation in Metaverse. I'd like to welcome everyone, welcome the presenters, welcome our discussants. And I'll be a content and behavior moderator myself today. So I'll be policing your speech behavior. I'll be giving you like 8 minutes. Yes, we'll have essentially 4 presentations listed over here, plus 1 surprise presentation. So there will be 5 presentations altogether. Okay, so we'll actually start with a video presentation by Pin Lin Lau from Brunel Law School. So let's give it a go. So Pin, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pin, and I'm pleased to present an outline of my paper titled Predation and Peril, Content Policing and Moderation in the Metaverse. I'm also very proud to represent the Responsible Metaverse Alliance, one of the sponsors for this Congress. I'm very grateful to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present this via a recording, as I'm disabled and have some health issues and cannot travel. Without further ado, and bearing in mind our time allocation, I'd like to dive right into the paper presentation. Now, the key issues that are being dealt with in this particular paper is with regards to child grooming or sexual abuse and virtual sexual assault or harassment on avatars in the metaverse. And we know that these are incidents that are very concerning that has been happening over the last few years. For instance, a notable example is the BBC News investigation into VR chat, which found that some of the virtual rooms in this very popular online platform contained avatars that were simulating sex. A researcher posing as a 13-year-old girl witnessed grooming, sexual material, racist insults, and even a rape threat. Now, the problem here is that the app lacks age verification checks and allows children to mix freely with adults, not knowing who is behind a particular avatar. And of course, I'm sure all of us know the example of Meta's Horizon Worlds incident, where female presenting avatars have reported incidents of sexual abuse, including verbal and physical harassment. And in Horizon Worlds, a female avatar was virtually gang raped. Now, safety tools like the personal boundary features aim to protect users, but virtual abuse can still lead to mental health challenges and trauma. So I think it's important for us to understand the idea of predation and peril here, and this is what I try to do at the very outset of my paper, which is to explore the dynamics that shape virtual interactions and to draw interdisciplinary insights that would shed light on the psychological mechanisms that underpin perpetrator behaviors and victim vulnerabilities. Now, some of these interdisciplinary insights, I think, would help us in trying to understand these particular virtual interactions. For instance, things like anonymity and the disinhibition effect, which basically allows individuals to disassociate from their real-world identity and leads to disinhibition, where people may engage in riskier or more aggressive behaviors without fear of social consequences. There are other scopes like de-individualization, online disinhibition and empathy gap, the social identity theory, escalation and desensitization, cognitive biases, among others. And secondly, the interplay between social norms, power dynamics, and digital cultures actually significantly influences child abuse and grooming as well. For instance, things like social norms, things such as power dynamics, where power imbalances that exist in relationships based on age, authority, economic status, or physical strength. And perpetrators, particularly abusers, exploit power dynamics here to manipulate victims. They gain trust, they isolate victims, and desensitize them to inappropriate content. And digital cultures also play a huge part in this. I don't intend to go too much into this because I'd like to spend more time talking a little bit about the content policing and moderation that we might be able to do. And obviously, for these reasons, it is important to have content policing and moderation, Because the metaverse is just as real an environment as in offline lives, and it already has a problem. And with the investigation into the prevalence of sexual assault in virtual landscapes, this is actually comparable to real-world gender-based violence. And what I try to do in this paper is to think about how we can use feminist theory research that emphasizes the intersectional aspects of online harassment and acknowledge its amplified effects on marginalized communities, and therefore to stress a necessity for inclusive strategies in combating virtual violence. And as for the regulatory framework, I think we all are completely aware that applying real-world existing laws to the metaverse is a complex and evolving challenge. It's a virtual and decentralized environment that operates differently from the physical world, and its unique characteristics can sometimes present difficulties when we try to enforce or adapt traditional laws. Now, while traditional laws on harassment, privacy, intellectual property, contract may extend to the metaverse, gaps remain in addressing unique virtual crimes. Efforts to regulate online behavior face obstacles due to the transnational nature of virtual interactions, and really this needs international consensus and cooperation. In fact, the absence of a centralized governance system in the metaverse complicates enforcement mechanisms. And we need to think about innovative regulatory approaches that balance freedom with particular safety. And we need to think about how policymakers can work towards establishing comprehensive protections and ensuring responsible content moderation to mitigate potential harms in virtual environments. Having said this, and before thinking about reinventing the wheel, I think we should look into methodological approaches to find ways that can strengthen the links between autonomy and governance. For instance, through a building of some kind of a digital ecosystem. Now, it's defined as an interconnected set of offerings that fulfills user needs in one integrated experience, but also comprises businesses and stakeholders across different sectors that collectively offer a broad range of products, services, which may include things like content moderation and safety as well. Hence, what the paper does is to argue for the incorporation of cyber law and human rights discourse that are viewed together as digital rights jurisprudence, and vis-a-vis instruments such as the European Convention on Human Rights. Now, I think one of the main challenges is actually the lack of technological knowledge amongst the field and the need for comprehensive mapping of legal tools and regulations, both at national and international level, around how algorithms, about the technical workings of metaverse, which might include also some AI there. And there exists a common belief that the law cannot keep up with technology, and we know it as the law lag, right? Well, while it is indeed the case when we think about technology-specific laws, we also know that technologies are rarely created in a legal vacuum, and they come into an environment of general legal rules, including international human rights standards, and they should be compliant with and respect these rules. And therefore, in light of the international human rights standards that are already in place, it makes sense for organizations to work together to map the applicable standards under an international framework and measure these against long-standing principles to determine together what action then can be taken now without the need for specific metaverse laws. And I think this is something that we can take in discussions from neighboring technologies that deal with AI. And many projects that have been EU funded at Horizon 2020 and indeed in the future Horizon Europe project will have wide-ranging societal and human rights implications, and this can affect a spectrum of existing human rights standards relating to data protection, privacy, equality, human autonomy, and self-determination, which would all be applicable to this instance here as well. In addition, for instance, one of the ways in which the European Convention has been described as a living instrument has proven that it can actually accommodate new social and technological developments. And human rights should remain the common thread in the normative discourse around technological development. And this is not to say that our perceptions and rules and how we understand and value our autonomy and privacy do not evolve as the technologies develops and expands. The interaction between technology, policymakers, and legislators is a continuing practice, and the process should not lead to a loss of normative anchors that already exist in international human rights law. So, addressing these concerns, I think, necessitates a hugely multifaceted approach that integrates technological solutions with legal provisions and human rights considerations, prioritize things like proactive monitoring, swift intervention protocols, and collaboration with global law enforcement agencies like Interpol to effectively tackle cybercrimes in virtual environments. And Interpol has specialized units that work across borders and sectors to ensure that criminals don't exploit children. They identify young victims. They help law enforcement. They have the International Child Sexual Exploitation Image Database, which uses sophisticated image comparison software to make connections between victims and places, as well as the Interpol Specialist Group on Crimes Against Children to think about how they can enhance investigations of sexual crimes against children. Now, these are all examples that we can take, and therefore gathering law enforcement, regional and international organizations, NGOs, the private sector, and academia. These are ways that we can develop new trends, techniques, develop best practices for content policing and moderation in the metaverse. Thank you very much for your time, and I wish that we could have had time to discuss this even further. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate really to scan all my information that's available here. And I wish you all a wonderful Congress ahead. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Pin Lau. It was a presentation very easy to moderate. Okay, and now we'll switch to presentations dealing with Digital Services Act. As you all know, for more than 20 years, we had a rather liberal framework in the European Union. We didn't have a notice and takedown procedure. It was basically up to member states to implement it. Very few states did so. And now, with the Digital Services Act, a major change came. Now we have the EU-wide notice and action mechanism in place. So let's discuss the implications of that mechanism and other mechanisms in DSA through the lenses of the presenter to the left, Jean, and University in Leuven. Okay. Jean, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you to the organizer for organizing this conference. I think it's a really good venue to discuss emerging issues surrounding the metaverse. So our papers that I co-authored with Noémie KRACK, who is also a researcher at the Center for IT and IP Law at KU Leuven, is entitled Virtual Worlds, Real Risks, Exploring User Safety in the Metaverse under the Digital Services Act. And our reflections started from the following from the following headlines, which were shared to us through Professor De Bruin, who is our supervisor at Leuven, and is actually one of the discussions for this panel, so I'm very excited for this. And so, from this case, we did not decide to focus on a specific case of rape, but we tried to take a larger approach on user safety in the metaverse, looking at it through the lens of the Digital Services Act, whose one of the objectives is to make sure that users of online platforms are safe when they are online. And first, to do so, we needed to determine what is metaverse, what is user safety, and those are older slide version, but I will go through them because there are made too many, so I'll go directly here. And we decided to come up with a working version of metaverses and virtual worlds that we could use to tailor it to the material scope of the Digital Services Act. So what we define in the paper is we use the term virtual worlds, and metaverse says in the plural with a small capital M to designate a collection of virtual worlds that are operated by the same service provider, by the same company. So, and then the metaverse that is for the future would be a sort of interoperability between all those different service providers. And that is not what we really focus on in this paper. We focus on the application of the DSA at a platform level. So, for example, Second Life, Horizon Quest, Roblox, Fortnite could be in the future under obligation from the DSA. So our next interrogation was on the concept of safety in the metaverse. What does it mean? What is the impact of the metaverse on safety. I'm not going to delve on this too much because we already discussed the risks and the impact of metaverses, notably to its immersive character yesterday and, well, today as well, even though the last presentation was cut a bit short. But in the end, we found out that the wideness of the concept, as well as the different factors influencing it through the metaverse, made it an important concept to understand and made it so that we wanted to see how the DSA, through its content moderation obligation, could have an impact on safety for users. So our next jump was on content moderation, which we also just discussed in the last video, but we identified several challenges for content moderation in the metaverse, the most notable being on the type of content itself, as the Digital Services Act does not define information. It does not differentiate between, for example, conduct, behavior, and actual content, which is a key question in the metaverse. So it means, of course, that on that topic, the DSA might not be the most appropriate legislations to tackle metaverses issues. On the other side, and let me go through this quickly, that's our general conclusion on the current regulations. It does provide online platforms providers with a procedural framework on content moderations, governance issues. It increases transparency, and this could be beneficial. For example, we tried to look at Horizon Quest terms and conditions to see if they were clear, intelligible, machine-readable as the DSA imposed it, and we found that clarity could be improved. So application of the DSA for those providers could actually help, but it will not be sufficient given the fact that specific characteristic of the metaverse, most notably the immersiveness and the increased risk for user safety, are not specifically taken into account in the legislations. On that topic as well, the DSA lacks in providing a definition of what should be considered information or not online. And while this is not as an issue on classical platforms where content has more stability, where it's easier to trace it back, it could lead to more problem in metaverses, where some behaviors can be happening quite quickly, cannot be recorded, and cannot be linked back to a specific URL or a specific place on a server, which could then give issues when it comes to enforcement of the legislation. Our last observation on the DSA was we tried to see if the risk assessment obligations that the DSA contains for larger platforms, so only for very large online platforms, which has over 45 million users in the European Union, which is currently, of course, not the case with any metaverse provider, but it could be well the case in the future. And so we found out two things. First of all, those risk assessment obligations could help in the sense that it would make platforms providing metaverse services, it would give them the obligation to consider certain risk for users' rights, such as freedom of expressions, risk for user safety, user well-being, mental well-being, gender-based violence. So that would be a nice addition, of course, but the way those risks are looked at is from a systemic point of view, and we know that in the metaverse there is also increases for individual risks. So in that sense, Article 34 and 35 of the DSA, which are focused on those largest platforms, might not be as well completely coherent. So to conclude, because I've been trying to be quick, as was asked by the boss on the right. So the DSA, it does offer guarantees for content moderation. It does increase in some way user safety and as well users' rights, notably by providing clearer rules for content moderation that will be also applicable on the metaverse. It will allow users, for example, to get better access to redress mechanism. It will not be perfect as it is not specifically tailored for metaverses. So the question we can ask is, do we then need a specific framework for metaverses? Is it worth it? Is the phenomenon of the metaverse large enough that it requires such a specific framework? Of course, we rely on the DSA and then other legislations to already regulate it. And if we do need one, in which direction should we look? So here we offer some path. It's not clear answers, but we consider a risk assessment framework similar as the one from the AI Act. The use of regulatory sandboxes to make sure that we can still have innovation when it comes to metaverse technology in Europe, as well as safety by design obligation. We also identify several challenges for the future. I'll list them very quickly: the impact of generative AI on metaverses, the various level of immersiveness in metaverses with difference in hardware allowing to access the virtual worlds, as well as the next challenges caused by interoperability. And thank you very much. I think that's just a little bit under 8 minutes.
Thank you so much, Gian. That was perfect. Yeah, it's so easy to moderate this panel. I mean, it's unbelievable. You know, the lesson for the future: just talk to your panelists before the panel, you know, and then explain them a few things. Yeah, it's going to work. So thank you very much. Yes, indeed, the essay contains some loopholes in this regard. It was not really written from the perspective of metaverse, especially not from the perspective of policing behavior in a 3D dimensional world. So that is definitely going to be a challenge. But I will leave the pleasure of commenting on papers to Professor Giancarlo Frosio and Jan de Bruyne, who will give you much more detailed feedback on that. Okay. Now, the third panelist, Gian Marco. Now, what's your take? Oh, thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. It's going to be even easier to moderate my speech. I'm sure I'm going to go below 7 minutes. So. Super. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. I'm honored to present my paper. The paper is basically intends to make a little bit light on the actual state of the art about content moderation in decentralized metaverses, which is a topic that it's, I think, I wouldn't say underrated, because we all know like there is an actual problem, but there are gaps both on a regulatory and also on a literature point of view, so scientific point of view. There's a couple gaps to be filled from here on. So I will start my presentation. So this very quick preliminary appeals, I think they're kind of useless because we have seen them in the previous presentations, but overall content moderation is addressed by regulation on the EU level, above all the DSA, which Jean just presented, but also, oh yeah, thank you. But also the regulation EU 2019-1150 on consumer protection and product safety, and regulation EU 2021-704 on the dissemination of terrorist content online, because this is also something that addresses, something else that addresses content moderation in online on platforms other than the DSA, and was even enforced before the DSA. Now, content moderation in the metaverses raises further issues when it comes to the typology and the detection of contents in metaverses, and the moderation in the centralized metaverses. I analyzed the two aspects separately, and then at the end, basically, I tried to make a whole argument putting together the two of them. Now, okay, typologies of contents in the metaverse. Of course, here the key factor is the level of immersivity, as also Jean highlighted, and the speakers before me did already. Immersivity gives an enhanced real-life feeling, which may lead to further psychological harm when it comes both to traditional contents, and this is because of course, the components of AR, VR, XR, and mixed reality, up not to distinguishing real life and virtual life. There are several studies on this. There are studies that highlight how a person identifies with its own avatar, also when it comes to sexualization of the avatar. So scientific studies have showed how when an avatar is sexualized, a user tends to identify itself more in that avatar. And this, it goes without saying, raises quite big problems when it comes to sexual harassment in the metaverses, sexual violence, and to the extent that we'll still have to figure how it's going to be, honestly, the level of harm on a criminal point of view that a sexual harassment might give in a virtual world. Because if we are lawyers, like we have to consider it under a criminal point of view, and it's not easy at all to try and overcome the physical element. So this has to become a hot topic in the future. But so far, I think we don't have enough element. It's easy to say there have been a lot of claims, of a lot of allegations of sexual violence, sexual rape, sexual violence and rape in the metaverse, it's very difficult, of course, on a legal standpoint to highlight that this is actually a sexual violence. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm gonna wrap it up. Conducts that would not be harmful in bidimensional platforms then would become harmful in the metaverse. Not only sexual violence, but also robbery and theft, identity theft, and other kinds of conducts. So, second problem is detection and the suppression of contents in the metaverse. Here, the key factor is the synchronous nature of the metaverse environment. It's theoretically a synchronous platform where the scale and the volume of interaction would make it extremely complex to detect, screen, and remove illicit conducts. So, solutions so far focus on real-time moderators, and there's a interesting article. I think it's the one here written by Mosley that I cited. It's like just another day in the ordinary life of a content moderator in the metaverse. So it's an actual person just wearing his glasses, his headset, and going in the metaverse and trying to detect and prevent and suppress illicit conducts. This is a huge problem, again, because it's a synchronous feature. Like, we have to prevent it real time while it's happening. This is also something that is highlighted by the Interpol in a recent report in 2024. Like, the actual problem is the prevention and suppression of a given content. There are some AI tools that may moderate in real time. Oh, I'm still there. I'm sorry about that. In real time, like Roblox implemented it, but their efficiency is yet to be assessed. And again, it's not real time, but it's nearly in real time. We have to consider the scale and the volume of the interactions, the avatars' identities, law enforcement issues. There's a lot of additional problems, as the doctrine has highlighted. Okay. Then the second issue I'm highlighting is what happens in decentralized networks. I'm not going to be like long on decentralization. We all know what it means. There's the absence of a central node that are processed by and stored by multiple nodes, like peer-to-peer, with a system of interconnected, independent, privately owned computers that work together. I like this definition from 2019. There's like further, of course, development of decentralization is the distribution. As yesterday, a presentation, I don't remember who the speaker was, but it was interesting to highlight. The Web 3.0 is basically decentralized. The Web 4.0 is basically distributed, but so far we cannot really distinguish the two. Now, what happens? Well, decentralized networks are huge problems, again, for content moderations, because the absence of a central node, on one hand, central node that is a service provider, an internet intermediary, like Facebook, Meta, all these tech giants, on one hand makes the internet and the social networks more transparent and trustworthy because there's absence of third parties and central nodes governing basically the environment. They're more democratic because power to the people. Less affected by central censorship, so it's the decision on what has to be removed, moderated, kept on a platform might be arbitrarily decided by central nodes, of course. So it's more resistant to privacy and security. Examples are, of course, a blockchain system, cryptocurrencies, NFTs, where the powers of consensus. So all this, like, decentralized network appears to be like a beautiful fairy tale, but it has a lot of flip sides of the coin. Because in decentralized platforms, it becomes complex. When the metaverse, but I think it's going to be when the metaverse will become a new social network, like of daily use by a lot of users, the issue will become even more like perceived. So here there's no central authority capable of autonomously removing contents on a decentralized metaverse. Federated networks that are operated by multiple coordinated and interoperable decentralized nodes. We should agree to terms and conditions. Now, okay, I am gonna wrap it up. I thought I would go slower, but so there are not actually actual solutions to how deal with content moderation in decentralized networks. Illegal contents are enhanced in typologies and its moderation is complex. Decentralized networks represent a legal challenge for content moderation, which is even more enhanced in decentralized metaverses when higher in immersivity, synchronicity, and with AI components. So new policy strategies have to be discussed and solutions and possible regulations also to address the issue. Thank you and sorry for being late.
Thank you, Gian Marco. Thank you to listening to my telephone. That's my assistant, non-AI assistant. One remark from my side as far as Web 3.0, Web 4.0 things. From computer science perspective, there is no such thing as Web 4.0. There is no such thing as Web 3.0 yet. I mean, we've got blockchain, but it's not being used widely. My recommendation to all of you is to look at blockchain as just another type of a database, okay? A special type of a database, distributed database that primarily records, so you can add the records, but you can't remove records or edit records. So this is the main difference between traditional databases and blockchain-based content. And this creates a major challenge because since you cannot delete records, then you cannot delete also harmful or illegal content. So you have to do some tricks to deal with it on a higher level. But this is something to be definitely analyzed deeper. Okay, thank you very much for that. And now let's move to Adèle SERIO, and from Montreal, right? The Center for
Exactly.
AI Research, and the top researchers in the AI world actually come from Canada, from Montreal. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Montreal and Poitiers in France. And thank you so much for this invitation. My article is about protecting young players in the metaverse. So protecting young players in the metaverse is one of the challenges, if not the most important, for the development of a sane and safe internet. The aims of my article is, of course, analyzing and understanding the issues surrounding the protection of minors, but also from a specific perspective. It's about civil law solution and an economic overview of the speculative and lucrative environment. So for this reason, I shall deal only in a limited way with the criminal aspect. But as a relevant and topical starting point, I wanted to explain the essential to understand the relationship between video games and metaverse, that both share the same problem, the same concern, the similar audience, young and educated, influenceable in search of stimulation and entertainment. So video games are the cradles of the metaverse thanks to their capacity to stimulate creativity, synergy, and communication between players. As such, there are decline in various video games categories. In every respect similar to the characteristic of metaverse. So first of all, the sandbox games and the MMORPG games. Basically, the sandbox game is when the player is not constrained to achieve a specific goal and has a large degree of freedom to explore, interact with, and modify the game environment. Secondly, the MMORPG game. Maybe you may know one of the famous MMORPG game, which is World of Warcraft, released in 2004, that stimulate basically a close collaboration with the entire community. So as a final example of this articulation, I will mention the case of Epic Games. Epic Games has laid the foundation for a parallel virtual world that unlock technical limitations to improve the immersions. It's calling on multiple contributors, content from all sorts of stakeholders, from an individual to a commercial organization. And I don't know if you ever watched the concert of Travis Scott in Fortnite, but there was basically 12.3 million of users that was watching this concert, and more of the half was children. So that illustrates that whereas video games were initially designed to be playful, the metaverse aimed to push back the frontiers of entertainment. by building up a genius digital estate. And this fresh interest on the metaverse, not only on the game architectures, but also on the social media as also a marketplace is really crucial to understand. It places the individual, but especially the youth, not only as a players, but first and foremost as a consumer. So the first risk, of course, is a young player that could be exposed to gambling and massive consumption through the succession of business models. The first one is, of course, the free-to-play model. The free-to-play is basically referring to a totally free games, so it's devoid of any entry fee, and basically just have to accept the terms and conditions, register in the game and upload the game, and basically you can benefit theoretically without spending no money, but of course the corporate hope to generate revenue for advertising and in-game sales. What are the in-game sales? Well, the in-game sales, I try to, yes. Oh, sorry, it's, I try to, thank you. I can continue. So the in-game sales are basically microtransactions. Yes, perfect. Thank you. They are basically microtransactions such as loot boxes, boost, power-ups, cosmetic, expansion pack. They are small, optional, one-off payment made in-game and to buy virtual items. And we are surrounded by microtransactions, and youth are the first consumer to purchase this kind of items. And why? Because maybe you want to benefit from a special skills. Maybe you want a regional style in your video games. Maybe you want a dance step on Fortnite, you know. So I just precise that they cannot be exchanged. They are never constrained by age or financial liquidity. And of course, they are random natures and random outcome. Of course, the model of Thank you. The model switched from a free-to-play to a pay-to-win formula. The pay-to-win is basically when players who pay have a clear advantage for over those who don't pay. So it's really interesting because it creates indeed all of the issue, you know, like the toxic gambling environment that crystallize friction between players. Just to illustrate it, I just want to mention, for example, I will say a hot topic and a current example. In 2017, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Denmark opened an investigation on a video games called Star Wars Battlefront 2. Star Wars Battlefront 2 was investigated, was the subject of investigation because of the microtransaction. So if you wanted to obtain the full content of the game, you should spend $2,100. If you don't want to obtain the full content of the game, if you want to use the free version, you need to get ready, play for 4,524 hours. So I don't know if you play video games, but if you play 4,000 hours of video games, you must be passionate. So
yeah, definitely.
So just to highlight this point. Of course, the FOMO effect, fear of missing out, really recurrent for player. Limited time event, seasonal event, for instance, where specific character skin and cosmetics can only be obtained either by getting lucky, either by spending money. So we have this evolution to a play-to-earn formula, which is monetizing your time playing in cryptocurrency and NFTs. I just remember that the goal of the metaverse is owning both the mobiles and the immobile goods in one of the same world. So the price of scarcity calls for the use of new technology, as we previously mentioned in our panel in intellectual property, so NFTs, blockchains, and smart contracts. The play-to-earn has absolutely no utility, and there is a major risk of a highly speculative environment. And I will also mention that the only goal is basically to invest, to let your investment grow within the framework of a randomized game. So children find it difficult to track their spending in digital games and fail to understand the value of money. They are creating inadequate conditions for making rational decisions. As a third risk, of course, a system based on personal data massive processing. I don't know if you heard me well. But of course, spreading false information, scams, hacking, leaking important data. Just to give an idea, 20 minutes of virtual reality can generate nearly 2 million data points and unique body language records such as gaze, gesture, and facial expression. Just to keep in mind this. And of course, it's not traditional data. It's not, I mean, it's a specific category of personal data. It's about biometric data. And of course, it's really risky. The risk for, of course, physical health problem for children as they grow up. I will be quick because Jean already talked about it, but we are basically, we are providing in a hyper-realistic experience that could increase the impact of negative interaction and lead to a rise on online assault and abuse. So, just an overview of the regulation that are enforced. Basically, the solution, the first one is the best interest of the child. It's a mechanism provided by the United Nations Committee of the Right of the Child. The best interest is three major, I will say three major points. The first thing is that it's a substantive right. The child's best interest may be assessed and taken as a primary. Thank you. Sorry, I just finished. I tried to be quick, sorry. But it's a substantive right. It's a fundamental interpretation of legal principle, and of course, it's a rule of procedures. Just for the general GDPR, we have two major questions: the sensitive data, Article 9 of the GDPR, and the consent, of course, double consent in the case of friends, the consent of the child, and the consent of the parent, which is, I think, really compatible with the best interest of the child that we mentioned before. The SA, we already mentioned it, just one sentence. The SA basically prohibiting targeting advertising on the basis of minor personal data. You can refer to recital 81 and 83. And finally, as a conclusion, we have other methods, of course, the GDPR regarding the data transfer, but also various methods of verifying child age. I'll just be quick, but the self-declaration, of course, it can be easily bypassed by children, but a mandatory parental consent, as well maybe as a digital ID, could surely be more efficient. But we need to balance, of course, with the privacy of the children. You know, like we don't want to enter in a kind of paradoxal situation when we wanted to protect children, when we ask for AI to implement a kind of selection for the age rate. So, you know, like it's a question of balance, but of course, our international regulation, as for instance, Meta. And I just want to finish about that. Meta sets a bunch of provision regarding that because they are inspiring to data privacy. Do not forget that Metaverse is a fusion between video games and social media, but paradoxally, since they decrease the age rate, the age entry from 13 to 10 years old, for the headset and for Horizon World, the Metaverse of Meta, I am a little bit skeptical about all of these things. So thank you so much for your attention. I'm sorry I was a little bit long.
Thank you, Adèle. Thank you. I agree. The metaverse from Meta is really a fusion of a social network and a game. And your paper is actually really good at analyzing all these games. I mean, I didn't know that there are so many metaverse-like games, and what I liked in your paper is the analysis of business models. So you really showed that you know the environment, including business models and their impact on legal rights and obligations. Okay, and now we've got the last presenter, the surprise presenter. So, Salomé LANNIER from University of Luxembourg. You're already, you just earned your PhD, right? Now you're a postdoc, so congratulations. And you're gonna be talking about undercover agents in Metaverse. So,
yes,
the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, as everyone, I would like to thank the organizer for this amazing opportunity to share among research fellows on the Metaverse. So, my presentation will tackle a legal discipline that has not been mentioned in the past 2 days, criminal procedures. It's not sexy. I'm going to try to make it sexy. So, we all agree that the increased use of the metaverse will facilitate the commission of crimes. That's for sure. So challenges to law enforcement authorities arise, some of them which have been already mentioned during the Congress. Identity, territoriality, jurisdiction, collaboration between states and private actors, and so on. So differently, here I would like to briefly discuss how police agents could investigate in metaverses without being identified as such. So, sci-fi already considered undercover agents in metaverses. So this is a Japanese series called Psychopaths, aired in 2012. These two avatars interacting in a metaverse are police officers investigating the murder of a man, which popular avatar is still operating online. One of the officers infiltrates a virtual community, although using her personal avatar. And she's like talking with a specific informant. And as a result, this informant ends up being killed by the same murderer. So it's quite clear that investigation in metaverse still create risks for both users but also police agents, while it also enables to collect a large amount of data secretly. Therefore, undercover agents are understood as a surveillance measure which create an interference with the right to privacy and the right to a fair trial, protected by the European Convention on Human Rights. However, the regulation of undercover agents relies exclusively on national legislation so far. So in my paper, I selected the French and Spanish investigatory powers that could enable the secretive deep dive of police officers in metaverses. So first, we have the infiltration technique that has been originally drafted for the physical world. It enables a police agent to use a false identity to surveil certain persons. Agents could receive a false identity as well in metaverses, not only a pseudonym, but a virtual avatar. The immersiveness of metaverses, with the increasing technological capabilities to mimic the physical world and human cognitive limitations, might support the application of this framework. On the other hand, we have the cyber infiltration technique that has been recently drafted for infiltration on the traditional internet. It enables online interactions by a police officer under a pseudonym. This specific measure might also seem fit for secret investigations in metaverses. Indeed, the agent would not interact physically with other persons. However, this binary division between infiltration and cyber infiltration tends to fade. Indeed, perpetrators are well aware that certain online spaces are patrolled or infiltrated by law enforcement authorities. Increasingly, online interactions are not only text messages, but also exchanges of video, images, and audio messages. So then, the undercover agent will need more than a pseudonym. So now, let's dig just quickly into the regime of these measures to assess if they would be fit to investigate in metaverses secretly, in accordance with human rights, always. So here I'm just going to mention one element. So the first one, the material scope. For instance, real-life infiltrations are limited in both countries to investigate a limited list of organized crimes. Yet, not all offenses committed in the metaverse or facilitated in the metaverse will qualify as such, especially with the increasing fragmentation of the crime supply chain. Differently, online undercover operations can be authorized to investigate a broader array of offenses, particularly those committed by information technologies. That could be potentially any offense in metaverses. And then I want to dig a bit more into the powers of undercover agents, both online and in real life. So first, let's talk about infiltration. In Spain, undercover agents can acquire and transport the objects of crime. In France, it's a bit more broader, because they can acquire, transport, and issue products or information derived from or used in the commission of the offense. So this version could fit a bit more better the metaverse and all the possibilities it enables. In Spain, you need an additional judicial authorization when the investigative actions affect human rights. So for instance, if you want to record the conversation between the police agent and the investigated person. Additionally, French agents can use or make available to perpetrators certain means, such as telecommunication systems. This could enable agents to use specific telecommunication means used by perpetrators in the metaverse, for instance, to access dark words. Now I go to cyber infiltration. French online undercover agents can participate in electronic exchanges and extract data on potential offenders. After authorization, they have 2 additional powers. Agents can make available certain means to offenders, but they cannot use these means, as in the infiltration framework. So we see that infiltration is more broad than cyber infiltration. And also, online undercover agents can acquire and transmit any content. Differently in Spain, online undercover agents can only exchange and send illegal files, not any content, only illegal files. But they're also allowed to use algorithms to identify illegal files. So this is a very important power for the metaverse, considering the incremental amount of data. But algorithms can also be used for other purposes, for instance, to spot illegal behaviors. Nevertheless, there is a big limitation to these powers. Or, maybe differently said, a big door that is open. Because Spanish online undercover agents can only act in closed communication channels. Basically, you need a judicial authorization only when you go to closed communication channels. So in metaverses, some spaces could be seen as public, accessible to all the users, and others could be seen as closed, accessible only to specific persons. The Spanish Constitutional Court defines a closed channel based on a reasonable expectation of confidentiality. Tell me how this is going to apply to metaverses. I don't know. So then it depends on the affordances, the technical affordances of the metaverses. And in spaces that qualifies as open spaces, then you don't need any judicial authorization. You don't have any judicial supervision, which is obviously a great risk for human rights. So with all of these different powers, we see that both powers from both frameworks could actually be relevant for police agents in metaverses. The ambivalence of metaverses, and particularly the immersiveness, would advocate for a fusion between infiltration and cyber infiltration. And in any case, these powers should never amount to entrapment, which is the limit set by the European Court of Human Rights. To summarize briefly, undercover agents in metaverses must investigate in an essentially passive manner, and they should not incite to commit crimes. The Spanish High Court has developed very clear guidelines on entrapment, and on the contrary, the French High Court struggles to establish clear criteria for a coherent regime on entrapment, which creates legal instability on the validity of these operations. So as undercover agents are granted extensive powers, which might result in a serious interference to human rights, their regulation should be urgently clarified. Such an interference might be even more relevant in metaverses due to the theoretical access to any space with no geographical delimitation of jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank you, Salome. Thank you very much. And now imagine undercover agents that are actually autonomous AI agents, and how to supervise them, especially if they will be creating a network of autonomous agents doing their job without any supervision, because we cannot really plug them out of the electricity. Anyway, thank you very much for this. And now I'd like to invite our 2 experts, Professor Giancarlo Frosio from the University in Belfast, who's a professor of intellectual property and technology law, and Gian de Bruyne from Leuven Centre for IP and IT. So they will give you some comments and questions. So Okay, Giancarlo, would you like to start?
Yeah, of course. So how
Thank you.
can I do that? I'm going to stand here. Yeah, I mean, I have my little walk there. Is that the microphone working? Yeah. Do you want me to go up on the podium? Yeah, great.
I will also moderate your timing.
I'm gonna leave the mic. This mic here, right? Awesome. So yes, first of all, thank you very much for having me. Very, very happy every time to come back to Alicante. First 2 days were rainy, but now sun is shining, so we're all very, very happy about it. Now, I have here a number of notes, and so first of all, the discussion of content moderation has been taken from multiple different angles and perspectives. Video games, sexual abuse, police investigation, user safety, and from a more broad perspective, which actually will lead me to provide some comments from a general perspective rather than targeted, because first of all, I'm not an expert of all these niche that you've been discussed. On top of that, I'm not an expert of the metaverse per se, but we have understood that the regulatory matter is about platforms, and already nowadays and in the future about the interaction between metaverse platforms and artificial intelligence. And this is especially true when it comes to the topic of this very panel, content moderation. And I know more about these topics, and therefore my comments will be meant to address those perspectives. First, great papers, even better presentation. So I'm going to deliver a few critiques that you might like to consider for improving your papers. They're not targeted to any of the papers. They just, in general terms, some of them apply to some of the papers, some do not apply to the paper specifically, or your paper in particular. And I'm going to get through this very rapidly. And I say, avoid descriptiveness. So, of course, this is something that I'm aware of because I read the papers. That doesn't emerge from the presentation. Avoid descriptiveness. Don't mention regulation or case studies. There's no critical analysis and review attached to it. Anything you mention should be conducive to make relevant policy points. And then some of you have been doing that actually, some other less so. Think more carefully about taxonomy when you set up your paper. Inter alia, to position better your specific discussion within all this discussion about platform size, category-based approach of regulations such as the DSA. Then I think a very important point that should be a polar star for writing your paper is look for your original contribution in theoretical or policy terms. That must be clearly connected to your initial research question, which must be clearly stated at the beginning of the paper and must possibly address an existing loophole within the regulatory framework or existing market failures. Then, after mentioning these multiple points that some of you might want to take on board or not, I think that I want to touch upon 4 points that might be suggestions for further developing and ameliorating your paper. In light of ongoing debates. Not all of you are touching upon these points, and I think when it comes to content moderation, these points are key in the ongoing debate. The first 3 points are more substantive. The 4th one is instead just methodological and goes back to what I just mentioned a second ago about policy, your original policy contribution that's going to make your paper stand out. And the points are constitutionalizations versus private ordering of content moderation processes and approaches, algorithm enforcement, due process and other fundamental rights, moderation of illegal versus harmful content, and then policy priorities. Now, in mentioning these points, then I'm going to have a number of questions attached. Now, I don't know how much, we have plenty of time, because Paul was so rapid and pushing you, was so good in pushing you to be rapid. So I think you might even have a few minutes to answer the actual questions that are attached to each of the points.
You see?
And you'll see how you want to go about it. Potentially, and this actually emerged in the first panel, and first set of questions coming out of that panel, in content moderation, we are witnessing a move towards constitutionalization of content moderation versus, and in order to overcome private ordering, which has been dominating in the content moderation practices for a couple of decades. This is happening, you all saw that, for example, via the DSA, because one of the major goals of the DSA is to bring in a fundamental rights focused approach that is meant now to port the Charter of the application of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights to the digital environment and the metaverse as well. Now, in fact, this constitutionalization moment might take the form of a co-regulation moment. So we are actually moving, rather than directly from private ordering to constitutionalization, from private ordering to co-regulation. We actually see that in the DSA, reference to co-regulation are in the DSA, and we see that specifically and very much emphasized in the new Online Safety Act, because although the Online Safety Act is, the UK Online Safety Act is a huge piece of legislation with more than 270 sections, all the implementation now will be a consequence of an activist of the Ofcom that will need to set up code of practice with intermediaries. Now, and so here in this context, food for thought, and then for your paper, and also for this panel, what's your view on how this development should pan out with specific focus to the different research question areas that you emphasize in your paper? And if there is a move towards co-regulation rather than private ordering, do you think that co-regulation serves well the purposes of safeguarding fundamental rights online? Now, the second substantive point, which I didn't see investigated too much in your papers, but I think it's very critical when it comes to content moderation, in the context, still in the context of the application of the fundamental rights framework in the metaverse, the central question that we've been discussing and which is emerging out of the debate related to all these legal reforms that are happening recently, is that of the preservation of due process in the application of, as part of the application of automated algorithmic content moderation practices online, and possibly in the metaverse. Given, and this is actually a term that we didn't hear much and I was expecting to hear more, given the black box nature of these algorithms. You might have heard about Frank Pasquale terming our society as the black box society. As the content moderation decision-making processes delegated to algorithms might be inherently unexplainable because they're hidden behind a black box that the developers and platforms themselves are not capable to explain. And if that's the case, how can we claim that there is any type of protection of the principle of due process? In addition, from another important fundamental right perspective, and obviously, and there's plenty of debate about it, and there's plenty of scholarship about it, algorithmic content moderation impinges upon freedom of expression. As it is a suboptimal tool at this very point in time, and results in a large number of false positives. At least as far as equity-based assessment is concerned, rather than moderation of manifestly infringing content. One big example is copyright fair use. In order to come down to a decision about fair use, you need an equity-based assessment. It's not a black or white. It's something that machines cannot do as such, and inherently cannot do, because it's something that needs a human equity-based intervention to balance the multiple factors. And here, actually, then, in the context of copyright fair use, I think that in the past there's a number of cases related to shutting down entire worlds on Second Life. And here, this is actually outside the scope of my questions here, but there is also a very interesting debate to be started about cultural icons and what is the extent of and our capacity in the metaverse to use cultural icons, which actually are protected behind IP. This was probably the topic of a previous panel, but this is very interesting in the context of content moderation as well. So here again, point to think about, and maybe that you want to give me your opinion. Now, the DSA, there was something else I want to mention here. The DSA now provides risk assessment and mitigation obligation for very large online platforms and online search engines, coupled with the Article 40 data disclosure obligation for uses of algorithms that might impinge upon fundamental rights, in particular in the context of content moderation. But we don't know, and we saw from the paper of Gian, we don't know if actually we might conclude that this type of obligations are not going to apply to metaverse platforms. So what are we going to do? Should we think about updating the framework in order to, given the sensitivity of the issue in the metaverse, to try to fix the apparent inapplicability of these new safeguards in article in the DSA to metaverse platform. Now, the DSA does not actually mandate automated content moderation anywhere, but of course, algorithmic content moderation is the norm. There's no way back. We're never going to go back to manual content moderation. There are other pieces of legislation instead which are mandating algorithmic content moderation. Article 17 of the Copyright and Digital Single Market Directive, and now Section 13 of Annex 4 of the Online Safety Act, which among the powers of outcome will include the power of suggesting algorithmic content moderation platforms to platforms as part of that co-regulatory process that will lead to the establishment of code of practices. Now, here, the question that you might think about. So, what do you think about this debate and how it is relevant with your specific research question? And should obligation about algorithmic content moderation be specifically imposed to metaverse platform? And if that's the case, should they be limited to manifestly infringing content or apply to any infringing content? This is actually a key question being emerging as part of the Article 17 of the Copyright and Digital Single Market Directive. Because the conclusion there is, we know that at this very moment of technological development, these machines can do nothing more than identifying without false positive, identifying manifest infringing content. Anything else they try to do, they're going to make mistake. And what happens? If they make mistake, they're going to jeopardize and curtail fundamental rights, especially freedom of expression. So it's a pretty serious issue. Sorry, I think I got lost here.
That's it.
Yes. The last important point, I think, which actually was a little bit, which not always totally cleared in some of the papers, the distinction, which then brings back to your necessity of having your taxonomy as clear as possible. Harmful versus illegal content. How do you place yourself within the ongoing debate, which actually has been addressed by the DSA, has been addressed by the Online Safety Act? Should we impose on metaverse platforms an obligation to moderate only illegal content or also harmful content? These are two different notions which are very, and defining a framework and coming down to principle in this context is critical for the protection of freedom of expression. So should we impose obligation to moderate only legal content or also harmful content, including disinformation? Because this is one of the key issues that emerge only in passing in the DSA, where the reference to disinformation was only added in the final and last version, and not with substantive obligation. And so here the question is, do you see any challenges, especially in terms of protection of freedom of expression, in this former option, the one of expanding obligation to online online harm, just rather than only illegal content? And then the last point is for your papers, and I think you should really think carefully about it. What is the policy priority that you would emphasize in the context of your specific research, and how you would address it? Perhaps considering present regulatory framework, how present regulatory framework are addressing such priority, and whether they are addressing them in a satisfactory manner or not. So rather than multiple minor and short reference to possible policy recommendation, focus on one major policy recommendation that's going to make your paper stand out. So there's a number of questions here attached to my 3-4 points. If I can repeat the single question if you want. Now it's up to you to decide whether you want to address any of these points, who wants to address any of these points, depending a little bit also on the emphasis of your paper. So
Giancarlo, thank you so much for this in-depth analysis. This was an excellent in-depth analysis. So good luck, guys. Now, but I want to give you a chance to answer these questions right now. So because I will ask Jan De Bruyne, could you please come up and share your comments and questions, and then we'll see how much time will be left, and then you may have to address some of the questions and respond to Giancarlo's comments and Jan's comments.
I think the 60 minutes.
It was not too bad, but I was touching this microphone several times and like
For my standards, I think we also.
No, thank you so much. But I feel pressed heavily, heavily pressed to monitor the content here. Anyway, Jan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for the very kind invitation. It's really great being here. So I also enjoyed reading the papers and also all the comments and the presentations that were already given. I know Jean, of course, because he works at CiTiP, and I'm a professor and head of unit there. So it would be a bit strange to ask him very critical questions because I see him like almost every day. So I will be very safe here. So if okay, the previous speaker gave some general considerations. I'll do paper by paper, but very short. I will promise to be very short to allow time for discussion. So first of all, the paper of Jean, I think it was very interesting. It's a good approach to the topic of safety. What I do still think that maybe better is it's still quite broad. So I think you need to get a narrow focus. It's because you talk about liability, accountability, safety, but at one point or other you mentioned the legal challenges that do arise under the DSA. So I still think it's important to focus on one element, namely safety, or like even more specific there. But I think it's nice that you use visuals, good for legal design, it's good structured. So I see a lot of interesting elements there. I will immediately drop my questions for the discussion. You talk about regulatory sandboxes. It's like one of my real big loves, regulatory sandboxes in AI especially. So how do you see regulatory sandboxes in the DSA context? I did not quite understand it, but perhaps you, also because I did not read that in the paper, so it's new information. So please elaborate on that. Secondly, my second question would be, how do you understand safety? I know that you define it in the text, but can we actually agree on safety? Because I think the concept of safety is really different in the law than it is in computer science, than it is in data protection even, than it is in liability. So can we talk about safety on the metaverse, and is there like a common understanding possible? So this was my first paper. The second paper was and of course, they're all very good. So I give like the critique, but I just want to make sure that they all are very good. The paper on decentralized metaverses, I think a very good paper, focusing on a relevant and very new topic. It's quite narrow and specific, clear research angle questions. I think it's well done in light of the immense, the majority of legal scholarships that's out there to find a narrow angle. I think that's good. What I do think could be increasing the quality of your paper is to bring more structure in it, to really align different parts, to really make sure that there's flow. I think this will come while you revise it, while you integrate it. More structure and also, so this is my main, shorter parts perhaps, because I think it's some sentences, some parts are quite long. My questions to you is, I got many questions, so I can provide them, send them to each of you individually. My question to you is, first of all, you mentioned at the end, I will assess whether the frameworks are adequacy. But my question is, how did you define adequacy? This is like a pure methodological question. Which criteria did you use or will you use to assess whether something is adequate or not? This needs to be assessed, perhaps from a law and economic perspective, I don't know, but you need to assess that. Secondly, it's like within this decentralized context, how will you ensure compliance? Because like, which law will be applicable? Which court will be competent? How will you make sure that in this decentralized environment, compliance with local international legislation would be possible? So this is my second paper, but again, very good, and I was very happy to read it. Then the paper by Adèle, the third speaker. I love the topic on children's rights. I think it's an important one. I'm also very interested in that. We have loads of researchers working on that, so please connect with the researchers at the Institute. I liked reading this. It's well written. I especially like the technical part in the beginning, the examples. It clearly sets the scene, so I do think that's very good. But I do have a question for you, because you talk about protecting young players in the metaverse, and it relates to the slight critique that I have. What I miss is assessing whether they are sufficiently protected at this moment, because you provide a lot of tools, a lot of examples. But for example, we have consumer protection, we have the data protection, so there's like already huge protection for children. I mean, especially local laws, but also applicable in Belgium, for example. We have a very solid framework for rights of children. So I think there, my question would be, okay, but is there not already sufficient out there? How does your research, what is your added value there to really, what is needed in light of this amount of sources that are out there? So, but this is my question to you, but again, I really enjoyed reading that, and I found it really interesting. And I will send you the individual papers if needed. Then the last one, by the regulation of undercover agents. I think it's, you managed to make criminal law sexy, actually. Of course, I'm biased because I like criminal law as well, but I think it was well written as well, a very clear topic. The link with human rights is very clear, so I did enjoy reading it a lot. It's a very interesting, important topic. My questions to you, and I'll also forward them if you would be interested, but please don't feel obliged. You can make a comparison with France and Spain, which I really like, the functional comparative approach. I do like that, but my question to you is, what does this comparison bring you? I mean, because you say, okay, France is like this, and Spain is like this, but what is from a normative conceptual perspective, what are your key takeaways from that? And more importantly, so just a question on a side note, in which country would you prefer being an offender, and in which country would you like, this is for food for thought, and in which country would you like to be a law enforcement authority? So these are my individual comments. I really enjoyed reading all of the papers, and to end with one and two general concept is, there's like foods of thought for questions. My first general question is, I think more the papers also perhaps need to pay attention to digital literacy, because I do think that we as legal scholars, we focus sometimes too much on the law. But for example, the pandemic showed in Belgium that people did not have access to internet, even do not have a computer. So we talk about metaverse, we talk about VR, we talk about AI, but the problem is that no one is really following. Like, there's people that are excluded, and I think this is the role as well from lawyers to make sure that they're included, especially for children. I do it as well. Like, I go to schools a lot to speak about safety on the internet, so I do try to contribute there as well. But digital literacy is really, there's only the digital transformation towards AI and VR. AR is only possible when everyone is included, and I think this is still a problem. So how do you address that? What are your thoughts on that? And also, do we not need a new way of making legislation? This is a traditional way. We adopt this DSA, DMA, AI Act. It takes years, a lot of unclarities. What is the role role of experimental legislation, sandboxes, but also, for example, policy prototyping, but also co-creation has been mentioned. So I do think we need to move away from traditional lawmaking to make tech law more efficient. And this is why my concluding remarks, but again, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it, and fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. Now is the real challenge, guys. You've got 4 minutes each to answer all of the questions, and yeah, good luck.
1 minute.
4 minutes. 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
4 minutes each. Okay, let's start in the order of the presentation. Jean?
There's the video first.
There is the video. Let's skip the video, okay?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for all the questions. Quite good questions, a lot of different intakes to analyze. I'm not going to answer all the 6 questions, the 6 general questions, because I think it won't be possible to do in 4 minutes, but I will focus on the one specifically that concerns risk assessments enveloped in the DSA and how this could affect the metaverse, since it's something we address in our paper. When we looked at it from the point of view of, okay, what would happen if a metaverse today had to do a risk assessment as provided by Article 34 of the DSA, and then put in place measures to mitigate identified risks as prescribed by the legislation, it would, of course, improve, so to say, user safety in the sense that platforms will have to make this risk assessment. They might identify some and then take measures in place, take measures to address those. Currently, there are already some guidance on those mitigating measures, but nothing specifically for metaverse has not been clearly in the eyes of the Commission. And of course, the Commission still had the possibility to do specific guidance on those specific articles, and they could do so if at some point they realize that one of the metaverse platforms would be able to reach the 45 million thresholds. Now, there is some limitation from my side. I think that risk assessment obligations could come sooner than when reaching the developed threshold, which is very high, 45 million users, and the increased risk in the metaverse due to the increased immersiveness might justify those risk assessments to be done, but that should not be done, in my point of view, by changing the DSA in that specifically for the metaverse, but by looking at a more specific framework for metaverses themselves, so that other differences, such as the challenges for content moderation, content typology, in virtual reality could be addressed at the same time as well. And so now moving up to the question from Jan. So on the first one of the regulatory sandbox, we did not push this so much in our reflection, as it is really one of the few paths we imagine for future metaverse regulation, so not specifically for the DSA, because it's not contained in the DSA at all. There is some exemptions for SMEs, but it's not really a space for creating innovation. But if, as I mentioned, there would have to be, or there would be a specific framework for metaverse, I think a regulatory sandbox might be a solution to allow smaller players to still innovate in the context of the European Union, to not lose any advance compared to other regimes which might be more permissive. But I'm not probably less expert on regulatory sandbox than you are, so I might need to do more reading on the specific issues. And then on the question of safety, which, we define by saying it's a very broad concept, but in the end we were not really able to have like a clear-cut definition, because it's quite difficult. But if I look at it mostly from the point of view of the DSA, which is what we do in the paper, safety is, it's an umbrella term to refers to measures that reduce potential harms to users. And as we see that, as we have seen in our presentation, in other presentations, that there are a lot of harms present in the metaverse for users, it makes sense to consider that safety is also more at risk there. But I do agree that still the DSA, in some terms, when it's got safety as well accountability, liability, sometimes those terms are not clearly defined and are also used in different meanings in different EU legislations, which can make it hard to understand for the researcher and as well the lawyer, or even more the computer scientist, developer, etc. And then the two last questions on digital literacy, and I think it's also very important to take this into account. We did not really consider it from a metaverse perspective, but it's true that the digital divide is already hard on a regular level for just people using computer and laptops. So of course with metaverses that would require higher equipment that might cost more, there might also be some increased inequality that could derive from it, especially if we use it in sectors like education. What if people with more means have access to better education through the metaverse, and that people that are less favored do not have it, it could further deepen the bridge between people in our society.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
And Gian Marco, now the floor is yours.
Oh, no countdown. I was waiting for the countdown.
No, don't worry, I'll work
Thank
it
you,
out.
Giancarlo and Jan, for your valuable insights and consideration, and also for the tailored suggestions. It's very much appreciated. I will start answering in order of question. Now, the harmful versus illegal content, it's a great point, but I think that the definition is very blurred. Like, to make a question to the question, what would you consider a virtual sexual harassment be like? Harmful or illegal? Because so far it's just harmful. Can we make it illegal? I mean, all the questions are connected, because can we make it illegal? Yes, but then the way of making the law should change, just like Jan said. So yes, definitely the consideration of the difference between harmful and illegal content is crucial. It has to be rather taxonomized perhaps, but it is difficult to do it because we don't know yet what will be the effects of several conducts. But when it comes to the infringement of the freedom of expressions, with all due respect to the United States regulations, I fear that something like Section 230 would apply in Europe. I don't know if like someone is familiar with that, but in the US there's way too much like imbalancing with freedom of expression when it comes to the balancing between freedom of expression and protection of safety and security. This is something that us lawyers have to bear in mind all the time. Now, freedom of expression is something that is, of course, we have to safeguard, but online it is very difficult to define where is the threshold of freedom of expressions. Now, today, sexual virtual harassment would be included in free expression, but it's something that's not working. So we sure have to work on it, of course, and consider it. I'm limiting only to this answer because Jan answered to the DSA. I think it does apply very briefly to metaverses, more or less, at least as they are today. They not differ from like actually social media with a tridimensional and relatively immersive component. The new way of making legislation is not a question, it's the question, I think, which might represent like the big change from now to the future. So far legislation, DSA included, are I think reactive, to take the example, and not proactive. The DSA itself is very limited, I think, but of course it cannot forecast and preview what will happen in 20 years. For instance, the decentralization problems is totally underrated in the DSA. I mean, it makes sense because still it is useful to protect what is the current situation. The new way of making legislation is very tough because, of course, when it comes to criminal activities especially, having a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach risks to infringe upon fundamental rights such as principle of certainty of the law. I'm sorry, just said this in Italian basically, I don't know the translation. And the fact that everyone has to be punished under a law that has already been enforced for something that he knows it is a crime. All those principles, if the law becomes too proactive, are actually threatened. And I'm not saying that I'm in favor of not changing the way of making law, but we have to consider this. It would be great to change the way of making the law, but I think we're not ready yet for it because of this, at least in Europe. But again, I prefer the European asset to other assets in which like making law is a little bit more fantastic, but then there's less rights for it. Sure.
Like for law, I also meant standards, because I think like the problem with standardization, I mean, like these data become so important, but yet not always regulated. So how do you something to consider as well?
Yes. No, yeah, because I thought the question was really, I would like to talk about like for hours because it's really, I think that I strongly believe that standards, everything should be, like the mindset with which we do it should be changed. So I definitely agree with you. I'm just afraid that for several things we can, for others we can't, but I hope we'll keep talking about that. I hope so. Thank you again.
I don't want
Yes.
to be misunderstood, so I need to make this clarification. My reference was only to highlight that you want to have that debate spelled out in the paper, because I'm a big fan of the approach of the DSA. I'm a big fan of an approach that's just going to impose obligation on illegal content, because I fully understand that exactly that's the problem, how we define harmful, and because we don't have a common definition, the effect of imposed obligation on harmful content is then to limit freedom of expression. So my point there is only, it would be nice if in your paper, for example, you make reference to all that debate, which has been ongoing for 5 years, for example, in the United Kingdom, because initially the OSA, there were obligations to moderate harmful content rather than merely illegal, which then were lifted at the very last moment before final. But I share your view there.
No, Professor,
I'm definitely not a fan of obligation over harmful content.
no, but it's highly appreciated because I acknowledge that I have been imprecise in my paper, extremely imprecise in not specifying harmful and illegal content. So I thank you for that, and I have to specify it. Perhaps I will highlight the answer and the infringement with free expression, but I acknowledge it. I mean, so thanks for that, and I think.
Yeah, thank you, Gian Marco. Thank you very much. And now the next presenter.
I go next, yeah. I'm going to try to take quite a different perspective, so thank you a lot for all of this food for thought. It's super helpful when you're trying to develop a paper on such a topic on metaverse. There is quite limited literature. So on AI content moderation, I would like to go back to what Les was saying in his keynote speech, that we have to place humans before AI. And we have to remember that a lot of content moderation is done by people in South countries, and they are suffering from it because they're watching child pornography, terrorism content all the day long. So yeah, it's just a brief remark, but AI content moderation is a huge topic, and I don't know how we're going to make it work between the AI Act and the DSA on specific parts on AI, but I don't know how we're going to make the link also between the AI Act and the directive on platform work, which also offers specific provisions on artificial intelligence. Then on illegal versus harmful content, I would like maybe to add a third category, unwanted content, because harmful is very contextual, and there are some content that platforms just don't want. I'm going to pronounce the S word, like sex, because yesterday Meta said, we are welcoming everyone in Metaverse as in real life. No, because platforms are really limited in this content. Because you can groom the children in a private, in Messenger, for instance, but you can't publish sexual education because you're going to be shadow bound, struck down. So I think it's very important to consider that most of these platforms are US-based, which is very Puritan society, and the people who are programming these algorithms and the people who are doing the taxonomy to teach to this algorithm to feed the data have a specific background with specific biases. So that was the thing I wanted to highlight on illegal versus harmful. And on the taxonomy, I really recommend everyone to read The Criminal Metaverse of Elder Haber. It's on SSRN already, but it's going to be published very, very soon. I'm not going to say anything on co-regulation because then I'm going to speak too much. And on the specific questions, what comparison brings, it's true, maybe it's not so clear in the paper because it was still a draft. I think it has two main benefits. First, from cooperation purposes, because we don't have harmonization at the EU level, and still we need to cooperate on these cases. And we saw it with EncroChat. We have a lot of miscommunication of what was the actual investigative measure that was used in France. Everyone is talking about interception of communication. No, it was not an interception of communication. It was legal hacking, which does not exist in most of countries. And it's the same for infiltration, because cyber infiltration in France is a dedicated measure, but in Spain it's just an additional or complementary measure to infiltrations. So it's not the same it's not the same chip in your mind. So I think it's very important to, I mean, the best would be to have a comparative study on all the countries of the European Union. I'm open for funding, but yeah. And second, I think it's really interesting because even though it's drafted slightly differently, we can see that none of these frameworks actually comply with all the requirements of the European Court of Human Rights. And that's really important to start saying to the policymakers, when you're changing criminal codes, criminal procedure codes, you have to take very specifically into account the case law of the ECHR and also the case law of the European Court of Justice, specifically for the link between data retention and access to data. And I'm done.
Thank you very much, Salomé. Adèle.
Thank you so much for your inspiring questions. About the co-regulation mechanism, and it's really, really interesting, but I think that more than just a co-regulation, we should not underestimate the pressure of the people, if I may say, the pressure of the street. And I'm thinking about the players. I'm thinking about a really specific example, which I mentioned in my paper. It's the case of the video games called Stalker 2: Earth of Chernobyl, which was the name of the game. And basically, the game wanted to implement this kind of play-to-earn system, and the boycott was so huge that they dropped out. So I mean, it's really important to do not, to take into consideration, of course, the players, because I think that in the case of Metaverse, that they are users, but also in the case of video games, they are basically on the same boat. So this is important due to the fact that the boycott, but I think that we should not forget that we're talking about lucrative economy, and I don't think, I don't know if the co-regulation will prevent them for developing all kind of play-to-earn things. Like for instance, I'm thinking about Tezos or Tezos blockchain or Ubisoft Quartz blockchain, private blockchain. It's basically all of these publisher companies wanted to develop this, and I think they wanted to play also in all of these failures of regulation. So we'll see if there's a balance that we can found. Yes.
Of my comment here.
Yes.
Think about it.
Absolutely.
And you can really update your paper.
Absolutely.
Mention the debate about from private ordering to co-regulation, and then providing your own suggestions.
Absolutely.
Co-regulation is not
Absolutely.
in your specific niche, but we should think about the involvement of the players.
Absolutely.
So it's not whether my comment is not about whether co-regulation is good or not. But there is a debate there, all the comments were meant to signify that. There is a debate there. Look into that debate and see if you can integrate it in your paper.
Absolutely, and I think that also integrating these third parties that are represented by players, but absolutely. And I thank you so much for this this comment. And about you mentioned also both mentions cultural icons. The problems of cultural icons. I heard about also Second Life case. I think it's really interesting because Second Life is an example of cryptocurrency implemented in game, but no cryptocurrency in this game, but currency still implemented. So it's quite interesting that, like in Second Life, they tried to build, I think, to lay the foundation for Metaverse, but at the beginning of the 2000s. So it was really interesting to see, but I think that in all of the cultural icons, maybe the video games will be, I think, more efficient, more relevant. When we see the result of what Meta did regarding cultural icons, I don't know. I have I'm skeptical. I'm kind of skeptical. So maybe not for Meta right now, not now, but maybe in a future. And I will also try to answer to your question, and I thank you for this. Yes, of course, we are reasoning a little bit by analogy, like we are the the national level, we have the European level, and of course the international level, and we try to find a mix in all of these regulation. And I think that, of course, something that could be interesting is reinforcement the CSA 2022. So I am not a criminal law researcher, so I will let the floor to maybe a criminal researcher in this case, but I've read the research study about proposal of a regulation laying down the rules to prevent and combat child abuse that was basically published in April 2023. And it's written that CSA proposal is expected to be limited. So maybe there is improvement regarding this. And I would just say in conclusion that even if we have all of this bunch of regulation, we already have, we still have problem, age rate non-efficiency, for instance. You impose PEGI 16, PEGI 18, and nobody is basically respecting it. Also, of course, buying with microtransaction, like when you see all of these young person, children's, they are not playing kindergarten with like with the traditional toys, like they are basically saying, oh, what's your new skins on Fortnite? What is your next move dance and everything, we are talking about basically they are owning crypto assets, sorry, not crypto assets, but digital assets, and I think that the major point is education. It's not just about regulation, but education to implement all of these basic rules within the house, within the nuclear family, having, of course, parent responsibility, liability, in this case of course, regulation for minors. So I think that there is a common work from the parent and from law, and of course from a big company, big tech. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Adèle. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, panelists, for very inspiring presentations, and thank you to our expert discutants for very insightful comments. You've got, a lot of food to think about, and we've got food that is awaiting us right now. Okay, so let's go there. Thank you.